You are about to hear Life in the Confederate Army by William Watson, narrated by Nick Marinovich. Copyright 2019, BN Publishing. Online at bnpublishing.com. To Colonel John Scott, C.B., 1st Renfrew and Dumbarton Artillery Volunteer Corps. Sir, having written a brief narrative of my observations and experience in the Southern States prior to and during the earlier part of the American Civil War, and as these observations touching the causes which led to the war were gathered from amongst the industrial and commercial classes, and my experience in the war being in a volunteer corps, I proposed to dedicate the simple narrative to you, as a gentleman who at once unites an extensive connection in the industrial and commercial world with an active interest and participation in the military defenses of the country, and whose services in public affairs generally are well known. I claim no merit for the work beyond a plain, honest, and truthful statement of what I actually saw and gathered from the general tone and sentiment of persons in the sphere in which I moved. I am, therefore, much gratified in having your permission to dedicate my humble volume to you. I am, sir, yours very respectfully, William Watson. P. Ridge, Skelmorley, 17th September, 1887. Preface. On the origin, progress, and issue of the American Civil War, there has, no doubt, been much written from various sources and from different points of view. Assuming those accounts to be strictly correct and impartial, still it must be acknowledged that in general descriptions of events of historical importance, the subject is generally taken in the abstract, wholly and collectively, and there is seldom room for any minute analysis of individual sentiment, personal views, or minor incidents, which might be interesting if given in a personal narrative, even though that narrative extended only to a limited portion of the general subject, and more especially if the narrator happened to be an outsider, having little or no direct interest on either side, but became a participant in the events through force of peculiar circumstances. The writer resided for several years immediately preceding the war in the capital of one of the southern states, and, through his occupation and station, were more among the industrious, non-slaveholding, and less political class. Still, as all classes took less or more interest in political matters, and politics was a general theme of conversation, he had ample means of observing the working of the political system. The place being the seat of government was the residence or headquarters of the leading statesmen and politicians, and the center of all political movements. He had every opportunity of observing the movements which led to the secession of the states, and the manner in which it was accomplished and carried through. He had also a peculiar advantage of knowing the private sentiments of a large body of the people when the secession movement began, and the change of sentiment which circumstances afterwards actually forced upon them. That he got mixed up in the turmoil and came to take part in the war he considered unavoidable, and he trusts the explanation he has given in the course of the narrative will be sufficient excuse. It may be a little disappointing to some that the narrative is confined to the early part of the war and to events which took place in the West and Center, and do not extend to the more brilliant campaigns in Virginia and the more sanguinary struggles in the later part of the war. But the writer presumes that much has already been written from that field, while many things which took place in the West and Center were less noticed and sometimes entirely overlooked in the multitude of more exciting events at the time. And, as he does not aspire to anything like a philosophic or historical account, but simply relates what he actually saw and experienced, he considers that the positions and places he happened to be in at different times, in and out of the Army, afforded him more varied and better opportunities for observations, which would be of greater interest in a personal narrative than if swallowed up in the midst of a large army in one place or in one continued campaign. In giving this account of his observations and experience, the writer sums up his observations from what he personally witnessed and from the general feeling and opinions expressed by those around him of the more moderate class outside of the ring of fiery politicians, and any opinions on the origin of the war he leaves to be deduced from what little testimony he has given, should anyone consider that to be of any value. That the struggle should have been so sanguinary, should have continued so long, and been maintained with such unanimity on both sides, and particularly on the part
Sample complete. Ready to continue?